Welcome to It's Fine, the podcast by Hunter Strategy, where we tackle key issues in technology and security within Department of Defense. This week, we're focused on continuous monitoring and risk assessment in DoD networks. Our guests are Dan Beller, Director of Cloud Solutions at Hunter Strategy, and Chris Sowards, our resident governance, risk, and compliance expert within the company. Dan has significant experience in supporting continuous monitoring for DoD networks, making him a key voice on this topic. Chris brings his expertise in risk assessment and governance, offering insights into the strategic side of network security. Together, Chris and Dan will provide a practical look at how continuous monitoring and risk assessments are carried out in DoD networks, highlighting their importance in maintaining national security. This episode is essential for anybody interested in technical and strategic aspects of cybersecurity within the DoD. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, a student of the field, or simply interested in security measures that protect our country's digital frontiers, this episode promises to be both enlightening and engaging. So tune in and let's explore the depths of continuous monitoring and risk assessments in DoD networks with Dan Beller and Chris Sowards. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hey. Morning. Thanks for having me today, Matt.
Since you guys provide very different perspectives on this, can each of you provide, from your perspective, an overview on continuous monitoring and its importance for defense networks?
Sure. So I'm coming from the perspective of an implementer primarily, software engineer, platform engineer, security professional. I would say that that continuous monitoring is really about focusing in on the operational and security within a program, within a system, within DoD across potentially a number of classifications, and figuring out how do you tie that all together in real time, be able to assess the overall risk posture, identify issues, and also tie it into the ATO process. In this case, supporting a movement towards continuous ATO or CATO.
Yeah, and Dan spoke to the ATO process, continuous monitoring. So on my side of the house, I focus more on the governance, risk, and compliance, as Matt introduced me as. And the focus really for us is traditional ATOs are granted for 3 years. When systems get assessed, they get a 3-year stamp of approval. Good luck. And step 6 of the RMF lifecycle is continuous monitoring, because technology changes, systems, missions, focuses change over the course of 3 years. So with continuous monitoring, as Matt introduced me, I'm the GRC director at Hunter Strategy. So I'm not the implementer per se, but I'm more of the policeman of making sure you don't speed, you don't, do anything, right? Like that's outside of your scope of your authority to operate. When granted authority to operate, or ATO, you're given guardrails and requirements to maintain. And that's where the continuous monitoring phase comes in, because a lot of times over the course of 3 years, systems will make major modifications to their system, technology upgrades. They want the latest and greatest. They need firewalls open, close, etc. So with that, anytime you make a major change in modification to a system, triggers a lot of risk or potential risk that has to be identified and verified and checked, balanced, etc. Right? So on my side of the house, continuous monitoring is involved mainly around ensuring the course of your tenure of having an authority to operate, any changes in identified risks or potential risks that are going to come about from an engineer, an architect, a stakeholder who just has a good idea that day, are being addressed, monitored, maintained, etc. In the assessment process, we develop policies, procedures, governance that mandates all of this, and that's why it's so imperative. Because without that, you're essentially letting the kids run free, go run with scissors in the street kind of situation. Dangerous, but they're going to have a great time. You give an architect that ability and everything, they're going to have a fantastic time doing whatever they want to do with their system. But then you're going to have an issue like SolarWinds, and we all know what happened with that, because it just wasn't kind of being monitored. New risks that were being adopted were being ignored, and it just created this issue. So that's kind of my side of the house with continuous monitoring.
And what would you say, and I think because this is just a kind of a follow-on to both Dan's answer and your answer, because this kind of touches kind of both the tracking and implementation side, how would you see critical vulnerabilities, CVEs, IAVAs, those types of things from your perspective in continuous monitoring, both as an implementer, Dan, and for you, Chris, kind of more on the governance side. How does that affect your approach to continuous monitoring?
With continuous monitoring, there's more of a focus on the engineering team to be doing regular vulnerability scanning and building that into the process. So when you have a critical vulnerability that is released as an IAVM or it just makes the front page of the Washington Post, there's already a structure in place to be able to inject that in to quickly assess it. And with a lot of the evolution in the last few years around software factories and the DoD CIO guidance on best practices around running agile, so that from an approval standpoint, if it's not a strategic change, it does not need to go in front of a CCB. It removes some of the guardrails to get fixes out quicker, and I think that that's something that overall is a positive direction that we've been seeing in the last few years.
Yeah, and I'll kind of follow suit with what Dan's saying and focus on that. So for DoD networks, they focus on the GRC framework NIST 853. So there's a control family called risk assessment, and RA5, the control is centered around vulnerability scanning. So let's say 2 years ago, a system owner or system was using some type of third-party software that was approved, it was being patched, plugins were being released. The DoD is actively monitoring ISSOs, ESMs, and everybody are subscribed to receive IAVAs and IAVBs, etc. Let's say that software becomes end of life. That vendor stops patching it, providing patches. At that point, there's a new identified risk injected in the system. Is there potential vulnerabilities that need to be patched that can't be patched? Are there vulnerabilities that we can't even scan for to know that they exist in the first place? So when it comes to continuous monitoring, to Dan's point about like vulnerability scanning, some things become obsolete to where you just can't scan them anymore. They may not be at risk and obsolete in that sense, but they're end of life in the sense of that vendor is not providing resources to patch those or anything. Microsoft does a great job. They'll report their end of life, but they'll report support for X amount of years, 2 years, 3 years, and say, we'll still patch this, provide plugins, we'll still monitor breaches and everything and let everyone know. But they have to draw a line in the sand too. And vendors do that. So in the continuous monitoring side, our approach is monitoring all of the software assets, ensuring the end of life doesn't hit, and plugins are still being released, and everybody is actively, and when I say everybody, I mean system staff, the DoD, and the vendor themselves are actively supporting this software itself, or patch, server, etc.
So just kind of playing off of this, because I know you guys have both been doing this a long time on a range of networks, ranging from, the big names, your Cipernets, your JWICs, but also kind of some unnamed networks that support specific kind of coalition or missions or specific things. So overall, how would you say that the approach to continuous monitoring has evolved over the last few years? If at all, or if you're seeing stagnation in that's also probably worth mentioning here.
Sure. So I think there's been definitely some evolution. There's still a lot of, from the assessment standpoint, we run into a lot of, frankly, govies that are still very focused on STIGs, SRGs, and compliance checkboxes more than assessing overall risk posture and trying to bottom line things. There's, I think, a little bit more appreciation and understanding that mitigations are a valid approach, as opposed to just being hammered over compliance spreadsheets. But in some ways, we see assessors that are excited about some of the newer technologies, cloud, microservice architect, software factories, and it's forcing them to learn more about how the sausage really gets made, as opposed to just looking at the end result. And certainly for you know for a long time, even before RMF, DICAP, DITSCAP, there were a lot of overtures towards understanding the process, the how, But really, a lot of the assessors really did not understand how to write software, how that all works, and starting to see more of an understanding in some circles. There's still plenty of room for upskilling in those areas, frankly, on the engineering side too. But that's an area that I feel like we're definitely seeing some improvements in the DoD space.
Yeah. And on my side of the house, I've seen it really evolve, especially in DoD space, with interconnected service agreements and memorandums of understanding. Because when you're talking about, as Matt said, about like some of the big boys, JWIX, I mean, even CyberNet, in a previous
Even those
life, I was
cross.
a cross-domain system engineer, which then that's kind of how I got into governance, risk, and compliance. It's yeah. So in continuous monitoring in the DoD world, what I've really noticed and saw very beneficial is a mature interconnected service agreement memorandum of understanding model. Now that's a NIST 853 requirement. Honestly, I think DIACAP required it too, but I wasn't mature in my GRC days to know how well that actually worked. But then also, when agencies utilize a single GRC tool across their enterprise, and especially when they use the same tool as other enterprise or other agencies that are they're interconnecting with. So, when referring to like JWIX and some of the big boys, as Matt was saying, in a previous life, I was a cross domain system engineer. So, we dealt with a lot of information that was traversing through various security enclaves, whether it's CyberNet, JWIX, some of the other caveats, or unclassified. And when it comes to, and I'm pivoting back to how this relates to continuous monitoring, is that systems are interconnected with one another. And if there's a vulnerability on one system and it's connected to 7 systems, all 8 systems in total now have that same vulnerability. Whether it's truly a vulnerability to them or not, there is a potential risk. So that's why I've seen a lot of benefit in the GRC solutions maturing over the years and the interconnected service agreements actually being very mature as well in that state because it allows us to monitor our system and every component outside of the system, cloud vendor or not. If they have a risk, we officially have a risk now. So that's kind of my take on how it's evolving.
So I definitely hear you guys on the evolution of how people and system owners and risk managers and engineers do it. How does tooling and any evolution in technology, and I understand this might be a laggard in DoD network specifically because DoD tooling is pretty much EMAS and ACAS, right? There hasn't been a whole lot of change there. But if you were to look at industry and how large companies are doing this and some tooling, how would you look at how DoD could be evolving in continuous monitoring that might take a little while for that tool to be adopted?
Okay. Yeah, so as Matt said, the DoD world, very slow, very cautious about anything they do for just purpose, of course. They move too fast with the national secrets and everything like that. Something gets exploited. That's not a risk ever worth accepting. But when it comes to commercial clients, their risk is losing money. They, their focus is money. When it comes to the DoD, their focus is their sensitive information at large. So let's kind of peel it back and just talk about a normal company, a normal corporation, not really the DoD in the sake, right? And how it's evolving, because how it's evolving today in the commercial space will be how it evolves for the DoD, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 50 years, let's be honest here. But yeah, so when it comes to that, there's a term and a new process coming out, and I'm reading it on another monitor just to help everyone understand what it stands for, but it's called OSCAL, Open Security Control Assessment Language. The premise behind OSCAL is an automated way to conduct assessments. Currently, assessments are very expensive, very rudimentary, requires a lot of senior professionals be involved in that from the side that Dan's on to the side that I'm on to the side of just people identifying that this is a need and how does that actually provide long-term revenue to your corporation, company, or agency. So OSCAL's approach is to automate this and utilize industry tools in a customized way or non-customized way to their system itself. I always like to relate this back to AWS because they're the biggest IaaS out there in the world, in my opinion, and the most mature. But they've done a really good job with some of their security tools and pivoting back to GRC frameworks. If you utilize tools like AWS Config, there's conformance packages conformance packages coded with JSON files to actually scan your system and run just based off the checks of that framework. You also have AWS Security Hub. It's another tool that can automatically scan based on the same thing, JSON coding, and it'll scan your VPC, your cloud environment, for said miscontrols. So something that would typically take somebody maybe a week, 2 weeks to even possibly root through, you could just run it overnight, run it within a couple of minutes. And then you also have ACAS, you have AWS Inspector that have plugins and stacks that you can scan for, or you can run scans on, that also correlate to controls. So that's where I kind of see the movement going in the automated way, even with policies and procedures, automating templates in a way that those documents, 50-page documents sometime, and there could be 30 of them per system, can automatically be scanned and identify what are your risks going to be, what are your non-risks going to be. Maybe this is an AI evolution aspect to it. I do see the future in that. I'm not an AI expert one bit, so I'm not going to navigate those waters on this conversation, but that's kind of the future I see, Matt.
Dan, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, just to follow on what Chris was saying, I think especially for cloud deployments or systems that are hybrid, uh, the capabilities of the CSPs to provide things like Security Hub or Microsoft Defender come to uh, they can talk across clouds. They can talk on your on-prem, and it can give you more of a single pane of glass or a control plane for these, and that's huge as an implementer. But also, I mean, I recently enabled some 853 and regulatory compliance and Defender for Azure for a project, uh, and I showed the ISO who had never seen this before, but has been busy trying to learn how all of this works, and was absolutely floored by what um, what it is able to show in real time or near real time, and align it to your GRC framework, uh, whether that's 853 PCI DSS, what have you. Uh, it's just making it a lot easier and quicker to be able to assess and then report. I'm with you too on OSCAL. I'm excited to see when um, there is broader support for it. Right now, I think it's somewhat limited to FedRAMP as far as the government space goes. But if uh, if it's able to generate an SSP for 853 with CNSSI 1253 overlays, that's a game changer.
Yeah, so Dan, I kind of want to have a conversation about that because I'm not actively supporting a DoD client right now, but you are. But I've had these issues in previous years with DoD clients and even anyone really in the GRC world because, it's always, it never has been that way. We've always done it this way approach. And technology moves too fast. You can't ever have that mindset. And when it comes to this and everything, when you approach like the ISSOs or stakeholders, even GRC people in that matter, and you present them, hey, here's an output of an automated scan tool that did this, how do you prove to them that it actually is up to snuff to what they need? Because to them, they're accepting risk in a technology or a component they're just not fully understanding. And sometimes they can take that as a developer, an architect just trying to push things through quickly, half-ass things. Pardon my French if anyone's offended, of course. But yeah, like how do you navigate those waters? Because that's something I've always struggled, but I seem to at least get more headway than our people on your side because I am a GRC person per trade. So they tend to trust me more on that about that at face value.
A lot of it's education and trying to find. At the end of the day, it comes down to the same kind of things. It's about relationships. It's about building trust, uh, proving it with uh, following through with what you're saying. A lot of the time, being able to provide a report and being able to lean on somebody like uh, Hannibal or Amazon to be able to say, "Hey, they're doing it. They have some provenance that you trust by virtue of previous experience." it can definitely help. But as far as actually generating the artifacts, it's still, is it an Excel spreadsheet? Is it a Word? It's all free form, and it makes it very difficult to compare across programs. And I think that's an area that is going to have to change if we want to see fewer delays on just processing a large volume of the assessment docs, so that systems can be approved quicker.
Yeah. No, and the whole ATO. Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. You can go.
No, please go ahead, Chris.
Oh
I got
yeah,
plenty of time to interject.
gotcha. Yeah. So back when I worked at the National Geospatial Agency, the whole ATO in a day concept was coming about. I actually don't know how far it's come along, but the whole process was trying to automate this and get systems ATO'd in a day. Now that doesn't mean I just grab a system off the shelf and ATO them in a day. There's a lot more work, of course, but it's an interesting concept. And what you're navigating is kind of like the beginning steps of that approach. You're trying to instill confidence in these system owners or your system owner ISOs today, but not become overbearing or abrasive to where it becomes so intimidating to where you're telling them I know more than you even about GRC. Because at the end of the day, architects and engineers don't, but GRC people have no idea how to engineer, code, or architect either. So that's why the whole concept of the DevSecOps personnel was so interesting to me. It doesn't really seem like it bears a lot of fruit, but having developers that are also security operators and vice versa, I saw that being the future in the cyberspace around what you do, Dan, and what I do. It's just so hard to find someone who's up to snuff of what you do and then up to what Matt Schreiner does with GRC. It's just few and far in between, and no one's willing to spend the money to capitalize on that one individual, the one out of a million, right? So, yeah, no, I agree with you. And that is a struggle that we've had. It's going to end one day. I just don't know when.
So
I'm not sure if that's.
go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, unfortunately, I'm not sure if. I mean, there's certain aspects of that that's just a skills gap in cyber from all types of roles, and unfortunately, I'm not sure that's likely to change before any of us retire. But
Yeah.
here's hoping.
Yeah, when Matt Triner hired me on and we first met, we were talking about the GRC space and everything. And I do a lot of mentorship with a lot of like junior cyber people in college around the Houston area. And, I talk about the different fields and like coding sexy and everything like that. And everyone wants to do all these crazy things. But a lot of people look at GRC as the gateway drug into cyber. It's like their easiest dip in the toe when it comes to cyber, right? And I've seen a lot of people after 10 years, that's how they got into cyberspace, know nothing about cybersecurity. They just know GRC at the end of the day, right? They know how to follow a framework, they know how to write policies, etc. Very important. But when me and Matt had met, my career in IT and cybersecurity was different. I was actually on the opposite side of the house and I transitioned over to GRC. Nobody ever does because they always called me insane. Like, why would you go to GRC? But I enjoy it. I like ones and zeros in the sense of everything's in a box and makes sense, but also square peg round hole situation at times. So that's why I kind of fell in love with GRC. But me and Matt have had a lot of conversations. Matt had a similar background in this. We know other GRC professionals, same as us two, to where we learned a lot about cybersecurity. And then when we went to GRC, we just surpassed everybody because we knew exactly how to talk to the Dan Bellers, the Matt DiVertolas, everything about how these things work, but then also know how GRC works. So, yeah, hopefully one day. I don't know when, but I'm an optimist. So, yeah.
Well, what I was going to say was that a couple things. One is, and you brought up a new topic, which is kind of that crossover, and I think Dan's probably the only cloud solution person that works at Hunter today that took an interest in, hey, I'm going to help get this ATO over the hump, and with that, learn a lot of GRC and a lot of the pieces that go into it. For me, it was sheer necessity, right? Like I wasn't as good of a software developer as the other people on my team. And as opposed to being the guy that everybody laughs at when he leaves the room, I wanted to be bringing value to the rest of my team. And none of them wanted to do the ATO paperwork. None of them wanted to figure out how to do the STIGs or how to maintain the compliance. And none of them really wanted to talk to the cyber risk team that was coming in and there to check boxes, and they didn't want to translate between what they did and that. And that was something that I was able to offer. And so to the question of how do we get trust in tooling, unfortunately, that's a human problem. We need to get people to trust the people that trust the tooling, and the people that trust the tooling need to learn to speak, the way that the AO speaks. Because it's not like GRC is a single language; it's a language of many dialects, and you need to be able to, one, just like how I can go to the UK or to Australia, and some of the words and some of the expressions may jar me because I don't know them. I can have a conversation, right? I understand American English as a dialect, and with that, I can learn, UK English and Australian English and other forms of. When I was in Wales, I did not realize that the people were in fact speaking English. The language was so heavy, and there were so many terms and phrases that were so different and so Gaelic. That it took me a while to understand the local dialect, but it's no different in going from, even within defense agencies or crossing from civilian to defense when speaking about ATO paperwork. So I think just having a good base lexicon of what 853 means, having anecdotal experience as to, hey, I'm not telling you you need to do this, but this is how it was done before, and we found we had some efficiencies for that. And then having AOs and AO representatives, typically AO representatives, because AOs are usually too busy to get in the muck of the actual back and forth beforehand, right? They're really relying on their representatives and teams, but kind of really working the way up through the process and getting everybody to understand and agree with what that means. I think that is a really important aspect. OSCAL was interesting to me because, while again, everything I said still applies, doesn't matter that it has all these cool features. You still got to prove it. You still got to learn to speak the language. You still have to educate people. But the fact that the schema shows how you embed evidence for every claim made in a system security plan written in OSCAL, and that evidence can be a link to a Word document that is a policy, which for some controls is what makes sense. And other times it could be to a Selenium test or a Python script that actually goes and does the thing that the control says you're supposed to do and has empirical evidence. So I think that the people that conceived the schema have done a really good job of making it a schema that can be trusted. But the tooling needs to get better. The GRC tools need to speak that dialect better. Right now, we're in a place where, and I'm not going to name names here because I don't want to get into GRC tool wars, because that could be a whole other episode. But right now it's kind of a very checkbox. Well, you must be able to export OSCAL. That's what they're telling of the various GRC tools that are used in government spaces. Need to export it. Well, that's great. That's a good start, that you can take all the stuff in the tool and export an OSCAL. Can you import it too? And if you go across tools, can you import, somebody else's OSCAL export? And today we're not there. We're just not, right? Most tools can't even import the very export that they made yet. They're still working on within themselves, and certainly cross-tool support is just not there yet. And that's, again, these are common of new specifications and schemas coming to industry to describe a thing, right? This is SAML 20 years ago, right? Where, one SAML tool was very different than another SAML tool. And the idea of being able to take one token and pass it between tools was just like, ooh, wow, that'll be great when that works one day, right? Like that wasn't a thing that was even expected in early days of delegated authentication. And now look where we are, right? There's open source tools that'll grab from 5 paid tools and everything will work great. So I think that is a key thing that I'm really glad to see that FedRAMP adopted first, because they are the lightning rod of where commercial meets industry in terms of government acceptance of commercial security plans. It's also great because, frankly, I don't remember the exact number, but I remember when I was helping a commercial company achieve FedRAMP that I saw in their documentation that they only have funding to support 18 new authorizations a year. And so if there are, what is the current estimate, 50,000 SaaS products currently on the market. So let's assume that we only need 10% of them, right? 4,500 of them are not needed for any civilian or defense mission. There's still 5,000 left. And at 18 a year, we'll get to them by the time, to your point, Dan, I don't know if I'll be retired as much as dead by that point in time, just from the math on how long that'll take. And getting to trusted automation in that process is the only way to do it. And then back to our topic, that's net new authorizations. The Kanban phone calls for FedRAMP are arduous. They are long. They are everybody sharing spreadsheets together to do continuous monitoring and show how they're doing things. And being able to automate that Kanban process is going to be a massive pivot in our government's ability to trust commercial cloud products and continually have them follow the rules that all of our DoD systems follow. So that was one. The other point I was trying to make, or was going to make before, and it's less relevant now, but I'm going to make it anyway, just because we've talked about OSCAL quite a bit, is there's lots of supporting tools that help solve the disparate problem today. And one I will call out by name because they're a partner and I think they're a really slick tool and we have no vested interest in them outside of that they're a partner and it's a slick tool, is Nucleus Security. And what Nucleus does is take the out, and I'm not even, if I'm pitching it wrong, somebody from Nucleus tag us in some comments, please. But my understanding is that they take the output of all of these disparate scanning tools that are out there and help turn them into tickets and help turn them into trackable items that aren't just tracked within the tool. And that's another huge problem is if it's not an ACAS scan, it does not upload to EMAS, right? Specifically speaking to DoD networks, right? It's just an artifact like any other, might as well be a PNG screenshot compared to a PDF or some proprietary file. Whereas Nucleus is trying really hard to kind of ingest from all these different tools and turn it into a ServiceNow ticket, a Jira ticket, some type of evidence that you can really show an assessor that, hey, every vulnerability that came in from our tools has a ticket. Every ticket has a disposition. Those dispositions might be that it won't fix or it's mitigated by something else or all the things that we've talked about here. But talk about traceability. Every single finding has a ticket. That's a massively big change because without a tool like that, that means you would have to take a raw scan and someone would have to go and manually enter in tickets for all of them. And back to, that's why FedRAMP has limited funding, right? That's a lot of work to do. And it's not particularly sexy work or fun work or work that would encourage any architect or developer to say, yay, GRC, I get to enter all of these ACAS findings into EMAS one by one as a poem. Or if I'm lucky, into a spreadsheet that's importable. That's like the good version of that. So I think there's a lot of tools that are trying to fit that niche. I think OSCAL is, I don't want to call it a moonshot because I think we're in closer distance of that than a moonshot now that it's been out there and we're starting to see its acceptance, but it's very much in the outer atmosphere still, right? Like it's not yet in Earth's gravitational pull, to keep with the space metaphor. But tools like Nucleus, tools like Axonius, there are tools out there that are trying to solve the problem today with the tools of today that I would say are not DoD wide yet by any means, but I've seen special ops and people that maintain, purpose specific secure networks have been the tip of the spear in adopting those tools. Because they're trying to figure out how to do it more efficiently. So I think that there is, the longer term OSCAL that with the support from NIST and agency collaboration and the typical iteration that specifications turn into becoming useful products that we're absolutely going to see mature. But I also think that the advent of some of these tools that solve today's problems are going to help model how people can start to trust a tool in general. I bet an agency trusting that Nucleus, again, just to use the example, not that they're the only one, but that Nucleus can grab all of these tools that you already trust, and all we're doing is taking every output and turning it into a ticket in a ticketing system that you also trust. Right? That is a way, way smaller gap than here's a bunch of XML and take a look at it. There are other people, and again, partners, so I will give them name credit. Easy Dynamics is developing tools that I like to think of as Google Docs for OSCAL. So you can collaborate on these things and make these XML files very human readable. And because that's one of the biggest things today, and why Word and SharePoint and all of these artifacts are built using the Office suite. They're the easiest to collaborate on. It's easiest for Chris to gather his input from somebody like Dan by making a doc, creating all the template and the preamble, and being like, Dan, put in architecture stuff here, right? And the best way we know to collaborate on written documents in the world, in any industry, DoD included, is Microsoft Office. So if we can start creating similar feeling tooling for OSCAL, that'll grow the trust. But it's a piecemeal framework here, right? We need to kind of people need to work with the tools they have today, and agencies that are interested in bringing things from the outer atmosphere into our orbit, like NIST, who's always taking big, long strategic shots, are going to be critical in getting us all in the same sheet of music. And I really hope that we're all still employed in this industry. When will it be ever easy? Will there ever be enough cyber people to meet the skill gap? No. And anybody says that AI is going to fix it, I would like to show them some really interesting answers from GPT on cyber questions that I've asked it, to say that it is probably not going to save us, at least not any time, not any faster than the adoption of these tools will probably create that trust, right? It'll be an aspect, big part, but definitely not the only thing. I'm going to do one more question and then let everybody finish up.
Matt, I actually wanted to follow up on something you were saying, though, if we have time. To your first point you were making, Matt, about the DoD migrating up. Let me just gather my thoughts on what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So, Matt, to your first point you were making about like FedRAMP being behind the curve and everything. Currently, I'm supporting a system that's leveraging 2 SaaS FedRAMP products. And we got access to their FedRAMP packages, their SSPs, etc. And one of them is from 2016. The other latest one's from like 2019. I'm not going to call out the names of these vendors by any stretch, but it's one of these things that this is now a risk. It's a risk because people are taking FedRAMP and saying, okay, you have the seal of FedRAMP, you're good to go. But in reality, they've had this ATO for 6 years, and FedRAMP has accepted the risk. And now every agency utilizing these services are having to as well, because they might not actually be doing proper continuous monitoring, because FedRAMP doesn't have the resources or staffing to keep up with everything. So what's your approach? Like, let's say you're supporting the system on the GRC side, and you get their FedRAMP package and you realize it's 7 years outdated. They're on NIST 853 Rev 4, and everybody's on Rev 5 now.
So I can say for me, and this is just because I try to take a real risk approach, and I say real risk is that the real risk is based on a threat model of a system and based on what we're concerned about, right? When I say to your confidentiality, integrity, availability, right? How does this affect the real concerns that we have in a system based on this gap? And so if the package is out of date and they've been doing no conmon, I want to know what blackmail they have on the jab that allowed them to stay out of date for 7 years, right? If there's conmon, yes, maybe their SSP is way out of date. That's not uncommon. But they have conmon, and I can look through conmon as an approach to understand what is the current open things within a system. And I try to stack that against real risk. That's what I try to do when I see things that are way out of date. What I will say is that, and this is something that we avoid, but we really try to look at what's POAM'd in that system outside of just the continuous monitoring, because there was recently, I need to find this, but there was recently an OIG finding where people were using inheritance from FedRAMP systems, as I highly encourage, because not using inheritance just really drives me nuts when it comes to waste of precious assessor resources, right? If the assessors are any good, it's hard to find them, so you need to kind of keep those moving. But people will not understand that they need to really adjudicate the FedRAMP body of evidence, and they'll say, "Oh, great, this is FedRAMP, and this control is listed as inheritable, and therefore I'm inheriting this." But then you look a little deeper in that FedRAMP package, and it's POAM, meaning it's not actually compliant. So we are inheriting a thing that they don't have, and that happens a lot, right? Because there is no connected governance between these systems of record, right? Between FedRAMP's GRC tool and EMAS as the example for DoD, right? And so that is, I think, a big gap that I think can be fixed with tooling and automation. That when you click inherit, that's where something like OSCAL is going to be great. When you say, "Hey, I'm inheriting this control," and you should be able to look through machine readable system packages to be like, "Oh wait, that control you inherited is listed as a POAM, so you can't inherit that yet." And maybe you can get the same POAM that they have and inherit the timeline, and it still be out of your authorization boundary. That's valid, right? But the fact that you list your control as compliant over something that you inherited that listed it as non-compliant in POAM is a problem. And so that's where I'd say that tooling is that's where I really have high hopes for OSCAL as a tool to be able to fix that connected governance problem. That said, in the meantime, it's educating people that FedRAMP is not a seal of perfection, and it was never intended to be. Right? It was it's to reduce over re-adjudication of the exact same bodies of, or sorry, not adjudication, recollection and reassembly of the exact same bodies of evidence. Everybody should still be adjudicating the evidence for themselves. And that's something that is misunderstood because you have some agencies, and I will name names here. DISA has done a bad job of allowing you to accept FedRAMP evidence as evidence, right? And the advent of IL4 and IL5 is, I have a strong feeling that IL5 should have been an overlay. It should never be a level of authorization. And I think it's created a lot of confusion because people think, well, IL5 is just more important than IL4. And I was like, no. It's basically an NSS overlay for cloud. Right. And there's some nuance there. I know I'm oversimplifying it, but I really feel like that's been DoD's desire to follow their own process, which is, again, warranted many times, has created this confusion of, well, if you're not IL5, you're nothing, which is like, or you can't do CUI if it's not IL5. That is not true. That is very much not true. But then you get into some other interesting nuanced things because we're here to talk about defense networks. Defense networks have these IL4 and IL5 requirements when they're cloud networks anyway, because they have sovereignty issues, which FedRAMP doesn't address inherently, right? FedRAMP, you can have a FedRAMP moderate and have people overseas doing all of your maintenance and all of your things, and that's perfectly valid. And DoD has additional sovereignty concerns, and just adding that as a checkbox in FedRAMP is going to be confusing to people. I think that is more of an educational gap than a technology gap. And unfortunately, too many authorizers and AOs long for the days of DIACAP, right? They don't want to. They're very attached to this binary checklist: you're approved or you're not approved, as opposed to we're making a risk-based assessment. And so that is a lot of those people who need to get educated or need to retire, right? I think it's going to be a combination of the two based on the individuals and where they sit. But I do think that the silver bullet there is going to be back to the skill gap in cyber. And, the government has taken a lot of push towards accepted cyber service, direct hiring authority for cyber billets, additional pay bands for like different ways to encourage qualified practitioners who understand these distinctions to be involved in securing a defense network and authorizing the security of a defense network. So I think everyone's making the right moves, but I think it's going to take a while to get there still.
Okay. Yeah,
So
no,
one
thanks for
question,
elaborating on that, Matt.
so one question I did want to end on here, and this has been a great discussion, is how do we monitor or measure the improvement of that? What metrics can we use to show continuous monitoring is effective in both our current state and in future states?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I can answer that really simply. Is how long does it take a 3-year assessment package to be produced? If your continuous monitoring is very mature, when it's time for your assessment, your ATO is coming to expire. If it takes you a couple weeks to get your package done and everything, that means for the last 3 years you've been maintaining your ATO package. If it takes you 6 months, that means you have a con failure somewhere, and nobody has been addressing what's going on, staying on top of it, and everyone's starting from scratch. So as simply as that, if I go into a system and say, "Hey, you're getting assessed in 2 weeks," and like it's going to take us 6 months, and we have all these issues, I know that they didn't do any con whatsoever, and that's their problem right there.
That's a really good point. Dan, what about you?
So I would add that if you're coming in for either already having or attempting to move up to having a continuous ATO, that's qualitatively a pretty good indicator of a process that's being done well if it's able to be approved. But ultimately, I think when you talk about metrics, I mean the proof's going to be in the pudding. So it gets down to the fundamentals. So things like how early are you detecting vulnerabilities? Are you only responding to IAVMs, or are you finding it on your own? Uh, Mean time to patch, especially with microservices. That when if you've gone from a monolith system where you have a version of Java because everything's running there, and then you migrate to microservices and you've got 10 different container pods running in Kubernetes, each with its own version that needs to be iterated. How quick are you able to respond when there is an issue? So looking at that, and then at the end of the day, I mean, also looking at compliance STIG findings and SRG findings, and if you're building in this into your process, you should be able to see over time just a reduction by like orders of magnitude. Just because many of the issues, many of the configurations are not exotic or unknown. They are, in a lot of ways, a lot of the same basic things that we've been dealing with for years on how do you build a secure system. Uh, you should be able to have a pretty clean uh, container OS at this point. It's not, it's really a matter of your priority and you demonstrate it through the results.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate this post. It's been a great discussion, and you both have a wonderful rest of your Friday.
Yeah.